Socialism's great until you run out of somebody else's money. Everything I have done, I've gone overboard on. You know, Linda once said, let's learn to dive. Let's learn to scuba dive. Okay, the short version of my history in that was I became chairman of the local club, and then I became chairman and CEO of the governing body.
Like, too far, Ralph, too far.
But your title of Mr. All-In is being taken.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, I'm gonna have to retire.
When I was in my 40s, I was looking forward to having a super pension. And it was like lots of people at the time, we used a company called Equitable Life. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
They went spectacularly bust. And in fact, all the lords and ladies and MPs in the House of Parliament, they had their pensions with Equitable Life. And they very quickly passed a law saying that the government would take over all their pensions that had been trashed by Equitable Life. But that didn't help all the commoners out in the country. Well, the reason I mentioned Equitable Life was because that affected me deeply. I wasn't going to trust anybody else with my pension, with my family's finances. You knew that if you invested, you were convinced that if you invest in the two big ones, you've got a bedrock. If you invest in another 20, we now know ship coins, you only needed one of these to really rock it, and that would pay for the whole blooming lot. But not one of them ever did rock it. Here's to the moon.
Okay, we are back, and this time we have a guest with us on what is the most bullish podcast out there when it comes to Bitcoin. That is the 4Bs, Bullish Bitcoin Banter and Bullshit, brought to you by the usual suspects, Mr. All-In, aka the $1 Trillion Man, Dr. Evil 10%, aka the People's Champ, myself, Sir Neverlook, aka the Excellence of Execution. Surprise, surprise, Mrs. No Show is still Mrs. No Show, but we have Ralph Lennox, author of
so you're going to all hold it up.
Bitcoin, the Digital Gold, a guide for proud parents and grandparents. So we are all holders and absolute lovers of the book. So welcome to the show, Ralph.
Thank you very much.
AKA Digital Dad.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invite.
It's fantastic. So we came about to learn about your book only just 2 weeks ago, and regular listeners to the show will understand we regularly look at books and always scan the internet and understand what's going on in the world of Bitcoin, and that's the whole purpose of the show, to bring to the masses what's going on and what's new in the development of this phenomenon. And so we thank you for joining us.
Good. Excellent. Let's see where this leads to. Go on.
Yeah.
Ask me some questions.
All right. Well, Ralph, let's start at the beginning, I guess, ultimately. So I guess a little bit about yourself and understanding, more about you, ultimately. So, background, family life, school, etc. And let's let the readers understand who Digital Dad is.
Oh my goodness. You'll need more than a couple of hour podcast to go through that lot. What I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit more about the financial side of what I've been through. Because if we go through everything else, your jaws might fall down, but let's just stick to the money side, okay?
Yeah.
I grew up quite reasonably well off in that my folks were real grafters. They had started with absolutely nothing, and by the time I knew who they were, they had a couple of shops, and my old man had a television hi-fi shop, and my mum had a jeweler's, just a sort of costume jeweler's, not a gold and diamond sort of thing. But although I enjoyed playing with my friends roundabout, by the time I got to about 10 years old, it was time to join the family firm, let's say. So I was the shop my old man had it was in the new town. It was in the old part of the new town. It was fortunate it had quite big premises, so that it wasn't just electrical. All the small appliances and televisions and radios, which were really newfangled things in the mid-50s and late 50s. They did bicycles and prams and things like that. So I was taught by the age of 10 how to service and fix bicycles, and customers would bring these in. This is long before the days of DIY. When something went wrong, people brought it back to the shop. And so everything to do with a bicycle, I knew about changing tires and inner tubes and brake pads. And my speciality was fixing the buckles on wheels. In those days, bicycles seemed to get full of buckles. And by 12, I found myself in my first suit, bespoke suit, so that I could work on the shop floor on a Saturday. And from that age onwards, I was in the family business. And by 14, I would say, I could read company accounts. I knew what all the profit and loss was, what overheads were. I knew what a balance sheet was. I could read a balance sheet. And my old man started including me in any meetings he had with, for example, the bank. He used a finance company, because at that point in time, people used to rent their televisions, used to rent anything, radiograms, what have you. Now, that's serious overtrading, where you buy in stuff, you sell it, but you don't get the money for it. So you have to finance every agreement. If you do a hire purchase or a rental agreement, you got to get the money from somewhere to pay the supplier. And you have to do that in batches. And funnily enough, winding the clock forward decades, the financial crash in 2008 was because people were packaging documents together with a nice document in the top, a nice document in the bottom, and a load of crap in the middle. Yeah. So in the late 50s into the 60s, you had to bundle your agreements together. It could be 9-month agreement, 24-month agreement. It could be a television set that was just on constant rental. And you'd have to go to a finance house and get paid by the finance house, who would then hold the agreement. And as you receive money from the customer, you would then remit a percentage of it to the finance house. So pretty much steeped in the mechanisms of money from an early age. And I then went on to university, and it was electrical engineering, which I was a geek at school. So it was maths and physics and science, applied mathematics. These were the sort of things I was good at. Teachers told me I was useless at English and French and what have you, which is a bugger, because in later life I needed French and writing a book. I think that's perhaps proven I'm not completely useless at English. But anyway, having graduated, went back. I actually was offered jobs by Marks and Spencer's management program and the House of Fraser, because I was heartily sick of electronics by the time I'd done 4 years of it. And I had no intention of doing any more electronics. In fact, I think that the only thing I remember of 4 years of electrical engineering is Ohm's law. And I think lots of people that do degrees can barely remember what it was they actually did. Anyway, having joined back into the business, because while I was at university, I really wasn't in the business at all. But I came back in at a really, really exciting time. It was the days of hi-fi systems, music centers, if you remember those things. And then eventually color televisions and video recorders and laser discs, and it was constantly changing all the time. In fact, one of the reasons I didn't persist it in the electronics system was I graduated the year before the microprocessor was invented. So within a year, my degree was completely useless.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And although I did design some equipment, old man was a judge for a British Show Jumping Association, and I actually became a judge as well. But we needed timing equipment, and timing chips, integrated circuits had just been invented, called CMOS, if that means anything to you. The original ones were 74 series, and they were really gutsy on power. CMOS was didn't use current; it was more of a static voltage rather than current they used, so they were much more efficient. And I designed the timing equipment, but that was about the only thing I ever used my degree for. So having joined back into the company, we did great guns. We eventually became the world's first Sony center, and we were one of the biggest outlets for Sony in Europe. And at one point, I was invited out to Japan to meet Akio Morita and present him with a trophy for the Trinitron system. If you remember Trinitron was the color television system. In fact, if you look at any old James Bond films, you'll see placed all over the place is the Sony logo. And they were the first sort of flat screen television. They were deep. They were physically about as deep as they were wide. But the screen itself was one of the first flat ones. And Trinitron was much more accurate and sharp. And anyway, so I was invited out to see the founder of Sony, and he was by then getting on in years, but a nice old gentleman. An anecdote on that trip was we were picked up. It was a fortnight's trip all over Japan. And on one day, there was half a dozen of us on the trip. And on one day, we were on the bus, and the bus got lost. The bus, sitting beside the driver in Japan, was the manager of the factory that we were going to visit. Now, in Japan, much loss of face if you're these very important VIPs from Europe behind you and you can't find your own factory. So eventually they stopped, pulled over, phoned the factory. The factory sent a car out to lead the bus in. And we then found out that the reason he couldn't find his factory was he had never, ever driven there. It was always a helicopter he took in every morning.
How the other half live.
So, yeah, anyway, our family business model eventually ran into the sand. It was the days of Comet and Currys and Dixons. Some of these names themselves have disappeared, and they had such huge advertising power. It didn't matter if we had a better offering, cheaper prices, but longer guarantees. We just couldn't. We just didn't attract the customers anymore. And eventually we went bust, as simple as that. We, to some extent, we used savings to keep ourselves going. And in later life, I managed to stop a number of people I knew when their business models were running into the ground. I always said to them, don't use savings. At that point, if you're at that point, go out and start something again. Yeah. If the model's not working, there's no point losing what you've already built up. Anyway.
What year was this, by the way? What year were you?
That would be 1986.
Okay.
So I had been in the business for 15, 16 years. Anyway, by 1986, the market did us a favor because I then changed to something totally different. In fact, related to Bitcoin, the funny thing about electronics, or maybe not so funny, but maybe not realized by everybody, is it's extremely deflationary. Every year, you're getting better performance for less money.
I'm going to say, I'm pretty sure I've seen some arguments with Mr. Orlin and various people on Twitter about how TVs show that inflation isn't true. Believe it or not, it's an argument. And it's a bit of a facepalm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jeff Booth always talks about TVs and electronics being deflationary, but yet they're still priced quite high, given the fact that the technology is getting better and better each and every year.
Absolutely. When we first went into the Sony system and decided we'd become Sony maximalists, it's funny how funny how history repeats, isn't it?
You were in the Sony tribe against Panasonic and everybody else, right? Yeah.
Yep,
JVC, all those names.
Now, when we went into them full tilt, the life cycle of a product was about 3 years. Now, as an independent dealer, you were then saying to yourself, and in fact, my wife Linda and I, we used to go down to London in the spring of the year to buy all the stuff we would need for the coming Christmas and the year after sales, and that was quite a jaunt. But we'd never been to the big smoke before, and we did this for a good number of years. They would announce all the new products, and we knew that the life cycle was going to be about 3 years. Now, we were putting our own money into it. We weren't a buyer for a big business or a buyer for somebody else. This was our money, our kind hard-earned cash that we were saying, right, we'll have 10 of these, we'll have 100 of these, we'll have one of those, that sort of thing. And over the next sort of 10, 15 years, that product cycle came down from 3 years to 1 year. And eventually they only ever made one production run of a particular item. So if you bought it in, if you didn't sell it before the next item came along, it would sit in your shelf and it would be a complete waste of money. You'd either have to severely chop it in price or discount it. And anyway, and that became one of the reasons the model didn't exist for independents. We had no fallback position. If we couldn't sell the stuff quickly, people just wouldn't. They knew fine. They weren't daft. They would pick up the latest catalogue, and they would know what the latest up to date thing was going to be. If it hadn't actually come in, they would order it and things like that. Anyway, having gone out of business, I didn't want then to repeat that mistake. I wanted to go into something that was inflationary, was actually going to bring in more money each year, and that was the building trade. And we took on an agency for something you've probably seen all round about, and it's flat roofs made of fiberglass. And has anybody ever seen that?
Yeah.
I remember your daughter tell me about how she went flat roofing at the weekend, and I was just like, bizarre.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing before we go on to that as well is, were you always encouraged by your parents to be in the business, from the cycling and then the hi-fi stuff? Because it sounds fantastic in the fact that you were already adept to be able to read a balance sheet and understand the profit and loss. But I guess there needs to be some sort of passion. So it wasn't you were forced to do it, you wanted to do it, right?
Oh, I was definitely a geek. In fact, compare that knowledge base with the fact that I was never ever taught how to kick a football. And to this day, I have really no idea how you would kick a football.
Okay. Yeah.
You had your head in the books, looking at numbers, figuring all that out instead.
Sorry, say again?
You had your head in the books, figuring out the numbers, and you'd rather do that and potentially fix some electronic device as opposed to go outside and kick a football.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's worked out well for you, that strategy. So
yeah.
Well, yes and no, because when living in Scotland and having a son, he obviously wanted to play football, and okay, I would do my best to play football, but after 5 minutes, I was bored with that.
Yeah.
I'd rather sit down and explain E equals MC squared or something like that. Anyway,
But we will come on to that as well, I'm sure.
Okay, well, do you want me to continue with the timeline?
Well,
yeah, go on, get us
absolutely.
up to current day.
Yeah.
All right, bring up to all right. Okay, well, anyway, after we actually bought in a product and went roofing. I hadn't a clue how. I didn't know really much anything about the building trade, and after a couple of years, I decided to design and build my own country house, and so by 1991 we cut the ground. We got planning permission to cut the ground and started building it. If you're interested, there's a video on my channel. You can see the house as it ended up. And as much as anything, that was to teach myself about building and also build the confidence in a completely new world that I had arrogantly stepped into and thought, oh, I can do better than other people. You see, the original idea was I bought this product as a wholesaler and I was going to sell it around other roofing companies and they would do the work and I would get the wholesale profit. But the trouble with roofing companies is that they're, well, let's not tar them all with the same brush, but they're pretty brain dead. They couldn't see the point of selling a product that was twice as expensive as what they were doing because they were in such a competitive market, they daren't price something a bit more expensive than the competition. They didn't see that they were going to make 2 or 3 times the money out of it. And so eventually I got my own teams on the road, and I just did a direct selling of it, just like double glazing or kitchens were in those days. And anyway, but within no time at all, we'd gone from being bankrupt and not having any money whatsoever. In fact, a thing called the government's enterprise allowance scheme saved my bacon. You did 6 weeks of training in how to set up a business, and you got the princely sum of £2,000, which actually helped me buy a little estate car, a Nissan estate car, and a wooden trailer and a set of ladders, and we started in business. And as I say, within no time at all, we could afford a country house, and we did it. We built one, and that became our family home. Susie will tell you about that if you next time you're speaking to her. But it also became too big. I'd seen my folks in a big house, 19 rooms they had in a converted farmhouse, and our house was that we built was much smaller. It only had 13 rooms, and we eventually downsized. And in fact, the day that Susie drove off to be with her boyfriend in North Wales, she did a 4-wheel drive pickup and a horse trailer. She had 2 horses, all her chattels, and we tearfully waved bye-bye as she drove away. And we nipped inside and booked a flight to France and went and bought a house in France. So she phoned up a few days later and said, does that mean I can't come back? And then worse than that,
but we're not there.
Worse than that, a couple of days after that, her boyfriend phoned up and said, does that mean I can't send her back?
That's awesome hearing all your background, and obviously you're clearly into money the entire time. And I think that education that you talked about, and I think it just resonates with everyone, where I did a computer science degree, and luckily the internet had well and truly come out at that point, because the generations just before me coming through had been trained on computer science and with no internet in there. And obviously the next 30 years is going to be only internet-driven computer science projects. And if you didn't have that in your degree, then it was completely worthless. But even looking back on it now, the internet courses that I got taught were largely redundant within years. It was that education was largely just, it got me through the door through a job as opposed to being useful for my career. Whereas I think the education you got there with your family business, learning about money, and obviously the booms and busts of business as well, is almost
absolutely
that's the priceless type of kind of education you can get, I think. But let's just speed this up to, I think, to Bitcoin. That's what we want to get on. So, because obviously you're in an age demographic, right, that you tend to be very resistant to Bitcoin. Yeah, you've grown up in an era where property has been booming. The stock market's largely only ever gone up. So your generation that had disposable income, that had investments, that knew about business, largely put that into property or the stock market, and everything's just gone up. And you're now at retirement age, very pretty wealthy, based in the fiat system. The fiat system has been kind. Obviously, our kind of prediction and narrative right now is that boom cycle is not going to continue forever, and fiat is probably going to implode at some point, and we're all going to get hit with hyperinflation. Your property values are going to go down, pensions are going to be lost. It's all going to be over. And I think for the younger generation, that's easier to see because the cost of living and the price of everything in balance with wages is all getting out of kilter. But for the older generation, usually they can't see that because they rode it out and now they're out of the game and everything was fine for them. So how the hell did you get orange pilled?
Everything I have done, I've gone overboard on. Linda once said, let's learn to dive. Let's learn to scuba dive. Okay. Now, the short version of my history in that was I became chairman of the local club, and then I became chairman and CEO of the governing body.
Like too far, Ralph, too far.
Your title of Mr. All In is being taken at this rate.
I was thinking that same thing. I'm like, I'm gonna have to retire.
You're a man of my own heart, though, as well, because we are all maximalists in terms of doing things. We don't ever, any of us, do things half-hearted. I mean, we did a challenge not so long ago, didn't we, Dr. Evil 10%, where it's a cycling challenge, and I think the capacity was supposed to be 50 miles and we did 100 miles that day instead. So it was like, okay, if that's what everyone else is doing, we'll do double.
Yeah, but did you become chairman of the cycling board as well?
Didn't do that.
There's levels to it. There's levels.
There's levels to
just give it time. Give it time. We're short of time at the moment with young kids.
Yeah, that's right. But do go on.
It's only when you go to an extreme like that you really start enjoying life. I've just said to you, we built a house in the country. We did that, I think, 3 years before Kevin MacLeod invented the term grand design. And I remember taking a couple of architects around the house once we'd built it, and they were seeing things that they had never seen before in the house, and that was an architect. And I had. I'm not boasting. This is just me. I had designed this house with lots of steelwork. Steelwork had never been used in domestic properties hitherto. We had reflective glass, double glazing glass with reflective surfaces on it. Nobody had ever heard of that. We had underfloor heating, proper underfloor heating, which I had to import from Italy. Of all places, maybe it was the Romans that started it there, but it had never been heard of in the UK. And Susie, in fact, helped me fit the pipe work and throughout the house. And then 30, 40 years later, I was helping them put pipe work in their holiday cottage that they were building. She and her husband have built a beautiful holiday cottage. Anyway, and the house was as much as anything, it was experimental. And I'll send you the link if you're interested. You can see some pictures of it. And it was also a showcase for the roofing system I was using at the time. Anyway, this is a long-winded way of getting back to Bitcoin. So when I was in my 40s, I was looking forward to having a super pension. And it was like lots of people at the time, we used a company called Equitable Life. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
They went spectacularly bust. And in fact, all the lords and ladies and MPs in the Houses of Parliament, they had their pensions with Equitable Life. And they very quickly passed a law saying that the government would take over all their pensions that had been trashed by Equitable Life. But that didn't help all the commoners out in the country. We just had to sit back and wait for the final balance to be worked out, depending on what money was left in the kitty. And I think we got just a bit less than the money we'd put in. We certainly didn't make any interest on it. There was no return on it. At least we got something back.
Well, just
but from then on,
was that your main pension fund then? You've been paying yes. The majority of your life.
That was going to be my main pension.
Wow. Okay, so you've had first-hand experience of the fiat system just really working against you there.
Yeah. Absolutely, and also when we had our first mortgage, it went up to 17%. So you're being faced with 6-7%.
Yeah,
you want to try 17%.
We know it's coming. That's the thing. Like, people don't think 17% is possible. It absolutely is and has happened in recent history. Because when was that? Is that like 40, 50 years ago?
80s? Yeah.
Well, that was in the 70s, yeah. That was in the, I think that was about 78, 77, 78, something like that.
Right.
And this might sound crazy, but I tell you, when you want to feed your kids and all you've got money for is bread and jam, yeah, you enjoy the bread and jam. Because you don't have, you can't afford meat, you can't afford protein. And that happened to us. So although you think we've been lucky with the fiat system, we eventually got through the inflation. And yes, I suppose it helped us because I think there was more people younger were on the property ladder than there are now. Everything seems to have, even having families seems to be about 10 years older than we were. We were having kids when we were 22, 23, that sort of thing. And it's now 32, 33.
Yeah. I remember, what is it? I remember growing up, 21, key to the door. It's more like 31 key to the door now. What 21-year-old's buying a house now? Like, it's just come out of uni.
Unaided. Absolutely.
You need a couple of grand from your parents to get the deposit on the market you were. But now it's, you need 30, 40, 50K. There's very few parents that can help their kids out to that extent at 21.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to cut over you, Ralph, but does it worry you, having lived through it and then kind of seeing perhaps the cycle repeating itself again, knowing how hard and how difficult it was for you?
In the 1960s, there was I remember as a kid seeing the storeroom filled with product that my old man couldn't shift. And the reason for that was a political decision taken multiple times called stop-go policy. Have you heard of that?
No. Okay,
in the times of Harold Wilson and what have you. And it was both colours of government. As an election would near, they would take the brakes off the economy. The foot would hit the gas. Everything would roar away. People would think, "Oh, this government's brilliant. We'll vote for them in again." And as soon as they got into power, there was bugger all left in the coffers. Inflation was starting to pick up again, so they would slam the brakes on. And they had more control in those days because nowadays they can put up interest rates, and that's about it. In those days, they could also control the deposits that were required if you wanted to buy something. If you wanted to buy a car or a television set, it was up to the government to stipulate. The government had it in their powers under the Hire Purchase Control Act. They could stipulate what the percentage down payment had to be. In good times, it would be 5%, 10%, and then it would rocket to 30%, 40%, which just killed the market totally. And after about 4 or 5 of these stop-go cycles, the government eventually realized that they were killing the economy. It was more down than it was up. And eventually, that was one of the reasons Maggie Thatcher had so many strikes on her hand, because the country hadn't progressed.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's kind of like the price controls of its time. Like, I haven't heard of that before, but like really interesting. You kind of think the kind of things which are talking about gas, when they made a bunch of gas resellers go bust because they had price controls in place, basically to hide the inflation. And when it hit that upper level, it blew up the companies and meant that we're then left with less suppliers who could ultimately, I suppose, charge more.
Coming out of, before my time, but coming out of the Second World War, the theory of politics was if we can all pull together, we'll win a war. In peacetime, if we all pull together, we'll win the peace. And it doesn't work. You need capitalism, you need competition, you need innovation, you need private development, private venture capital in peacetime. But we got stuck into this rut of socialism won the war, and therefore socialism would win the peace, and it never has. Socialism's great until you run out of somebody else's money.
You said it.
That's a great
When
quote.
these things were happening, were you also making the connections between government money and the controls, and then your own kind of destiny and your own life as well? So, if I'm doing this or I want to buy this, it's actually being controlled by the government, which is preventing me from doing something or is allowing me to propel to be able to do something. So kind of using it for good and bad.
Well, the reason I mentioned equitable life was because that affected me deeply. I wasn't going to trust anybody else with my pension, with my family's finances. So winding that forward, I'd obviously heard about Bitcoin and probably not originally in 2009, but by 2012, 13, I was reading about it and learning about it. It really hadn't done much at that stage. And I remember quite clearly saying to myself, "Oh, I really must buy some of this." And then just with some research, I tripped over something called WorldCoin, and its ticker was WRD, and that's not to be confused with the WorldCoin that's been taking people's fingerprints and retina scans, and they're calling it that a WorldCoin, but it's a different thing.
Okay, so this was, I guess, the original.
This was the original,
before. Right?
And although I now know better, they were criticizing Bitcoin as hard as they could to promote their own product, but it never really took off. And I would say it wasted, unfortunately, a year, 18 months, 2 years of my time, because I was waiting on this G Whiz thing product coming to market. And fortunately, it never did, because it would just have crashed and burned like every other shitcoin.
So what was its kind of like selling line? Was it just it's faster than Bitcoin?
Yes.
Was it a bit of an XRP?
Bitcoin.
It was a takeoff of BSV and Bitcoin Cash and stuff like that. It was this higher capacity. It runs faster. All the things we've heard 1,000 times, 20, 30,000 times since then.
And so is that completely gone now?
Yes. Yeah, that just fizzled out. And that's why it left this space in the market for somebody to bring out a new WorldCoin. Do you know the one I'm talking about? They put retina.
They were paying people in India,
Africa,
and paying them to go and line up. I mean, paying $50 or $100 to get their irises scanned.
They seem to be trying to establish the publicity, but then it just never stuck, did it? So it's disappeared again.
Exactly.
If you pay people to sign up, they're gonna sign up, sell the coin, and then move on with their life. Because the thing is, like the new WorldCoin is socialism. They seem to want to divide up the total number of coins completely equally across everyone. Everyone gets the same amount of coins when you come in. Of course, you're trusting that system, because as any socialist kind of society is run, it's we've all got the equal amount, but we run the system.
We're more equal than you.
We may print more, but don't worry, we won't print more, and it won't devalue your. And it's just one of those, and you go, and again, their argument is against Bitcoin that, well, Bitcoin there's just a few people that have the majority of the coins. And you go, well, that's the free market. Satoshi announced the white paper. He announced the launch date. Everyone had free access to go and mine some Bitcoin right from day one. And it's been going 14 years. And that is capitalism. And it's, you get, I always say you buy Bitcoin at the price you deserve.
Absolutely.
We all had access to it.
Yeah, I was waiting for that tagline to come in.
Yeah. That's why I say in the book, if I'm asked, should I buy Bitcoin? I'll say, yeah, buy it today because it might be too late tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So was it WorldCoin crashing which then got you to go back to Bitcoin?
Yes, everything came together because I was the house we'd built in Scotland was my pension. That was deliberately for downsizing. I never went into, building houses or buying houses because I was doing quite nicely at the roofing game. In fact, we're doing really nicely at it. In the early days, to earn £1,000 a day, it was quite good. And that was in the early days of it. And at that time, I had a good friend who was a freelance computer programmer, we'll call him. He was working for the NHS, so he was on a good number because they were paying him consultancy rates, and he was on £500 a day, and that was good money in what would that be? Late 90s. And but the roofing game was a license to print money. We were offering a terrific product. We were doing hundreds and hundreds of flat roofs and giving a 20-year guarantee on it. And I remember in the early days, an old-fashioned felt roofer saying, "Oh, you'll go bust if you're given a 20-year guarantee on a flat roof." But that was because, and from his perspective, that was the stupidest thing ever. You're lucky if you could get a flat roof to last 4 or 5 years. And in all we've laid thousands and thousands of roofs. And in all that time, I doubt if I could measure on one hand any actual problems we ever had any time we had to go back to see somebody's roof. So it was a great product, great price, terrific markup. And from my point of view, I couldn't understand, small builders, how they could eat. Well, in fact, I was going to say how they survived. Lots of them didn't, because their problem is when you ask a small builder to build you a house extension, it's extremely difficult to work out exactly how long that job is going to take. It could be 3 months, or more likely to be 6 months. And even if you guess at 6 months, you're not going to get the business because some other idiot has said, "Oh, I'll do it in 3 months." So that we stayed in our specialism, and I did castles and some amazing projects. But anyway, just getting back to the timeline. By the time we were downsizing, I then needed to do something with the money, because a bit like in a mini version of Michael Saylor, what do you do with that money? Are you going to put it into stocks and shares? Well, we did that. I put lots of it into SMMT, which is Scottish Mutual Mortgage Trust or something, and it was one of the best trust funds at the time. But before you knew it, it was flatlining and coming back down again. And so I thought, all right, I've now retired. Let's try this Bitcoin thing. And as you've noticed in the book, I went for this 50, 25% allocation, because there was, you knew that if you invested, you were convinced that if you invest in the two big ones, you've got a bedrock. If you invest in another 20, we now know ship coins, you only needed one of these to really rock it, and that would pay for the whole blooming lot. But not one of them ever did rock it.
You can say that again, because people are still gambling now, right?
But it is everyone in Bitcoin has a shitcoin beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is, like, a good foundation in finance does teach you to have a diversified portfolio.
Absolutely.
It's very rare that anyone that is in any financial kind of position will go, oh yeah, this entire market, but only look at this one thing and put all your money into that. Ignore everything else. You go, well, why'd I put all my money in Amazon when there's Google, Facebook, Microsoft all sat there? And it's just, I might as well spread it across them, right? And at least go use the blue chips. But the problem with, and so you have to unlearn that. I think that's one of the things we always say about Bitcoin. You have to unlearn almost everything you've been taught about finance, about the economy, because Bitcoin just breaks all the rules. It just flies in the face of economists, and you actually should only buy the single coin. That this entire sector is Bitcoin. You've got crypto over there, which I would put next to casinos. Yeah, you make the same level of financial decision as you do on a blackjack table as you do when you're buying a shitcoin. Whereas with Bitcoin is its own sector and essentially is the blue chip kind of asset of all financial assets, because it isn't underpinned by the US dollar or government. It is underpinned by the plebs and by the hash rate of the Bitcoin blockchain.
So
absolutely,
you've been, put it politely again, you've been kind of like with the split for, what was it, about 6 years? You kind of had that 50, 25, 25, and then you said you saw the light around about 2020. What caused that?
Yeah, I got caught by FOMO. I had lump invested, which is a better version of DCA, and then things started to take off in, what would that be, 21 or something like that. And the trouble with COVID is that everybody's lost 2 years. So if you ask somebody, when was that, it's difficult to remember plus 2 years. And I'd overbought, and the price started coming down. So I unwound that position, made a loss on it, not a great loss. And as I was just about to press the button on it, I thought, I'm going to get rid of my Ethereum. I'd done not bad on the Ethereum. I'd bought that, and I just hodled the Ethereum for as long as I'd had the Bitcoin, virtually, maybe not quite as long. But, and in fact, it was Susie that had said, way back in the early days, I think you guys were talking about Ethereum, and there was one or two internal presentations at GBG about cryptocurrency and Ethereum, and that kind of had given me the resolve. Yeah, well, okay, I'll put money into Ethereum as well as Bitcoin.
That was probably me, so I'm going to take credit for this.
Okay. Yeah. Oh well.
Were you I held on.
Okay, so Ethereum has only just been discovered to be a shitcoin as well.
Yeah, well, about this time, unfortunately, I might even be responsible for your shitcoin phase. I'm not taking any credit for that WorldCoin. that WorldCoin travesty has nothing to do with me. But at the time, yeah, I was in the shitcoin stage as well. I was a Bitcoiner, but I held about 10% of Ethereum. It's the only one I thought maybe this world computer thing. I was built into the philosophy of Bitcoin will be money, but Ethereum will be the internet, and all the games and applications will be run on Ethereum, and Bitcoin will be the money of that network. And you go, and I brought that for a number of years until I widened up and dumped that Ethereum. But yeah, I did do talks and stuff on exactly this. So yeah,
the question I couldn't get answered was what actual applications have made money on top of Ethereum?
Yeah.
I don't know of any.
No, well, there's plenty of products that have made money for the founders of the coin.
Oh yes, Ethereum. Yeah, I'm not talking about that.
But for retail, no, every single retail investor has got wrecked every single time.
Well, that's a draw of it, isn't it? With Ethereum, it's the internet of everything, and you kind of like when someone's kind of in the shitcoining phase, they'll be like, "Well, why have you got it? That could be everything." Well, is it everything or is it nothing? And when they actually think about it, it's actually nothing. It's not really got any use
other than marketing. It's great marketing. We do everything.
but what do you actually do?
Well, Ripple was the same thing. Ripple was going to transform the banking industry,
Yeah.
And I just didn't believe that. And I must say, for about 3 or 4 years, I thought this is absolute rubbish. And you had grannies in the Philippines all putting their under mattress money into this thing called Ripple.
So skipping on from Ripple.
So one question I was thinking of ahead of the session as well is, and you've really solidified it, you've always been a grafter from what I've heard, from a young, early age, and then coming into investing is taking away from you actually physically doing the work yourself. And you mentioned the fund, the Scottish fund. What gave you the confidence to be able to do that? Because most people's idea of investing is, I've got to sit in front of the screen and they see what they've seen on Hollywood and they've got to buy, sell, and then they just put it off and they think, no, I'll never be able to do that. So it was kind of a pivot for you to do something like that as well. So what?
Well,
again,
it actually wasn't, because the money I got back from Equitable Life, I put into peer-to-peer system, and I've actually forgotten the two.
Like a Zopa, or
yeah, is it Zopa?
Zopa?
And
Zopa,
and Rate Setter.
Rate Setter, yeah, Zopa, Rate Setter, both.
Funding Circle is that another
Funding
one?
Circle's another one. Yeah,
that was more of a
that's a business to business.
A business, yeah, financing. So for about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, when everybody was saying, oh, you'll lose your money in these unregulated products, I actually did not bad. It was at a time when people were getting, zero to bugger all interest from their building society account and their deposit account, things like that. And I was getting regularly 5-6%, which, it doesn't sound much, but it was 5 times more than other people were getting. So that it wasn't so much a pivot when I retired and, let's go into Bitcoin. I'd already been a bit avant-garde, let's say, okay? Yeah. And so that it was much less of a jump. And nor was I taking a risk. I'm not a gambler. I've only ever put, like 50 pence in the Grand National. I've never, ever bought a lottery ticket in my life. And the lottery ticket is simply because I know that it's just as likely for the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to come up as any other random selection. And who would ever put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a lottery ticket? So when it came to Bitcoin, I really did spend a lot of time studying it. And I was confident enough to at least put 50% of what I had into it. I can't say my wife was exactly convinced and overjoyed, but
when you were studying it initially, was that because it was back in 2014? It's a limited resources. So, what kind of information did you look at back then?
Well, Craigie, now you're going back 9 years or something like that. There still was information about as to what Bitcoin was. There was plenty of articles had been written about it and were being written about it. It wasn't systematized like we have now on YouTube and what have you, where it's constant every day. But no, there was information there. And as I say, I was already into buying Bitcoin when I spoke to Susie about cryptocurrency, and she said, "Oh yes, I know all about that." And Ethereum raised its head. But going back to when I actually became a maximalist, I had overbought at the peak, and not quite the peak. But anyway, I sold, I unwound the position, sold my Ethereum, and then thought, if I'm selling the Ethereum, what the heck am I doing holding on to this Solana stuff and Aave and all the other things that I'd also bought. I'd really been quite careful about everything I had. I'd listened to all the shilling about different things, but I'd also carefully looked at stuff. things like Cardano and what have you. That's they're multiple stream blockchains. They all seemed really good, and of course, one by one, they just all fizzled out. So, come that day when I was unwinding the position, I decided not to unwind all the Bitcoin, but to do half the Bitcoin and then just sell everything else. And the next day I thought, bloody good, that was the right decision. And I thought I was going to wake up the next day thinking, what a bloody pillow, yeah. I'd be better hanging on. You've hodled all this way all these years, and I was sure it was going to be the worst day of my life. And I actually woke up the next morning thinking that was the right thing to do. All of this other stuff, is going nowhere. And it was.
Were you doing this all alone, by the way? So, or did you acquire Bitcoin Bros?
I was a teenager in my bedroom. Yeah. Oh, no, there was plenty of people on the internet by that stage.
Okay.
But
close friends, family. Like,
no, I've never in my life managed to persuade anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And going right back to the beginning of this conversation, my demographic is just so conservative that it's until Bitcoin really starts flying, they're not going to be convinced.
Yeah, it's actually quite strange because listening to you talk about your business ventures and even your investing kind of strategies, they have been quite conservative, as in you've well researched, you're not looking for the huge gains. You are just going, incremental, like 5 to 10% year on year. That's all good, safe as houses, and it's all plodded on. But it does look like Bitcoin is it kind of stands out, even for you, where it's like, well, if people would look at kind of your investing history there and go, what the hell is this? But I think the reason why it makes sense is that, well, Bitcoin is the safest houses asset. People think it's the biggest gamble you can make, but on the risk kind of profile of investments you do, people think Bitcoin's at the top. But once you understand Bitcoin, it's actually right at the bottom, and it's actually the safest asset you can invest in. So it actually does fit your investing strategy, which is only invest in safe things.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Yep. And at no time was I ever fearful of Bitcoin. I really, I can honestly, hand on heart, say that I never thought Bitcoin would go to zero. Obviously, there are things you've got no control over. Governments can kill the on ramp and off ramp.
Yeah.
But since it was countryless, I knew that I could get on a plane and, I'd already knew what Andorra could do for me, or Switzerland, or the Cayman Islands, or the Isle of Man, and I was a plane ticket away from, appearing in person, opening an account, and I would dodge any bullets that were going.
Well, you mentioned you haven't managed to orange pill anyone. What about the wife? How she adapted to Bitcoin over time?
Well, she'll no doubt listen to this podcast at some point, and she doesn't get it. She looks upon it as being more like a religion, and I think it's the furthest thing from a religion ever. But once your wife's convinced that you've got some sort of religion, there's very difficult to persuade her not.
I was going to say, my wife keeps on saying, if it goes up, you're going to sell some. And then also, I get the, so are you having your chat with your friends tonight?
What do you do when the price goes up? You buy more. Yeah. What happens when the price goes down? You buy more.
You buy more.
So when are we selling? We never sell. Our grandchildren will probably be sworn to not sell as well.
Well, it's funny. Over breakfast this morning, I said, so she always looks at the Bitcoin price. I know she's always looking at it. So, but she hasn't mentioned it for the last, week? And it's gone up, 20% nearly in the last week. And I said to her at breakfast this morning, I say, you're not going to mention Bitcoin? She said, well, I did notice it had gone up a bit. Are you going to sell it now?
I had a
How
similar
does
conversation this morning, but it was when do I get a present or something from my wife? And it's just that your present is living with a Bitcoiner and,
I was gonna say,
having this
you've
Bitcoin.
married her recently, so you
Yeah,
should still be in that honeymoon phase.
yeah, we have had a house, wedding, children. Like Jesus, how many more gifts do you want?
it seems as though over the course of your life you've had multiple opportunities to prove people right or wrong, that you can do what you set your mind to, and it's shown that Bitcoin is no different. So why do you think that people are not able to jump on your bandwagon, knowing the amount of hours and the effort that you've put in, and the consistency of, again, showing that if Ralph puts his mind to it, he'll be the chairman of the board, and then not actually listen? Because I always talk about Mr. All in the fact that, when one of your friends decides that he's going to hand his notice in and retire, it pricks your ears up, and you've got to kind of listen. And it's not a Ponzi scheme, and it's not just a fad, etc. And so how does that sit with you?
Well, I am very comfortable with it, and apart from that single period when I unwound a position and basically put some of the cash back in the account, so I had a bit. You should always, as you know, you should always at least keep some cash going, and the other part I put into buying another classic car, and because that would at least I knew would maintain its value. In fact, all the cars well, with one or two exceptions, most of the cars I've ever bought have actually made profit at the time of it, if profit's the right word. If I've ever got round to selling them. I had this is going off, but I had a custom Jeep for many years, a custom Wrangler. I bought it. That's a terrific story, but I'll keep that for another day. I bought it as we were driving on an auction site as we were driving down the motorway, and I just won it, if that "won" is the right word. But when you know you're going to buy something and you're going to pay whatever you can, and I just skidded off at the junction that I needed to go and pay a deposit for the car I just bought. And Linda said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, look, there's a sign for an antique centre. I'll drop you off there." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because I've got a deposit to pay on a car." And she said, "Well, I can assure you something. There's going to be something at the antique centre that I like." Anyway, but that car I bought in the auction, and 7-8 years later, I made about 25% extra on it, more than I'd actually bought it for. So everything I've done is usually been with a lot of thought behind it. The country house we built, the cost of the quotation for the roof was £91,000, and I thought, bloody hell, I'm sure I could do that for a lot less, and I did. We just grafted on it, and it cost £25,000. There's some people have expensive lifestyles. They pay for everything. They pay through the nose for everything. They need high wages, but end up at the end of the day with not a lot left because of the fancy leased cars in the driveway. I'm sorry if you guys have got fancy leased cars in the driveway, but to me, I've actually been through that in the days when it was worth businesses leasing cars and you used them and owned them. But the whole economic system changed when you had to pay tax on the value of the car. But I had been through all of that with buying expensive cars on lease, and nowadays I don't understand why there are so many unreliable Range Rovers lying about every estate you drive into, and BMWs and Audis and Mercedes. It's just a gross waste of money.
But they do talk about as money devalues so quick that the high time preference comes around. So the flash cars, the exotic holidays, basically staying somewhere much nicer in your own house, the Starbucks every day, things like that. Just because you don't know what to do with your money, there's no real way which you can save up without gambling it within the stock market or on crypto or something else. Everyone just gets pleasure out of the moment.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Well,
Unless you're a accredited investor. But anyway, Ralph, I just want to bring it back to your family and orange pilling, because you said so. Your wife's not on board, right? Now, I know I did speak to Susie at length on many 6:26 train down to London and then 7 o'clock train back. And Bitcoin did come up numerous times because I was a big advocate for Bitcoin in the beginning. I started to wind it down once Bitcoin really boomed. I was like, I don't need to tell anyone. It's all over the news. And I started being quiet and then handed in my notice and just walked away. And like, is that related to Bitcoin? I'm like, no, I'm just had my day. It's like clearly is to do with Bitcoin. But but I never got the sense from Susie that she was a real Bitcoiner. And I think, admittedly, back then I probably wasn't a real Bitcoiner either, because I was holding Ethereum, probably, especially for these early conversations. I think later on, I'd shed that Ethereum, and then it was Bitcoin only by the time I left. But with your children, have you managed to, or would you say any of them are Bitcoin maximalists right now?
My son is head of, I'll get this wrong, he's head of international data strategy for Barclays Bank.
Oh no, not the enemy.
And and on numerous occasions he's just kind of going, Dad, shut up about Bitcoin. Not interested.
That's a disgrace. What is he doing?
But he's in a company and in a position where literally his day is about that kind of asset, and Bitcoin is bad. It's literally when you're being told it from all angles
as well.
It is going against everything which which you've been taught in school, university, then also your surroundings, these superiors who mentor you and guide you in your life. They're telling you that Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme. And I think it's very hard to, I suppose, take a step away from that and actually look at the bigger picture.
I hate to say it though, I wouldn't want to make, I'm sure your son's a great guy, but I don't want to make too many excuses for him, because I started my career out working for MBNA, right? And it was a summer job in between university years, and I went there and I was a tester. I was testing their new system, right? So they had this new fancy platform that could verify loans basically and do it all sub-second and whatever. But I was sat opposite the call center, and back in then it was the classic payment protection plans on loans that are now deemed illegal and made MBNA largely go bust, right? But I was sat opposite them and I heard them on the phone, and they were scamming old ladies and people that were financially illiterate and going, oh yeah, the loan of 10 grand is this, and your monthly repayable will be this. But by the way, can I just ask a question? Have you ever had any illness, any history of illness in the family? And if they said yes, and which they got enough questions where eventually you say yes to something, and they go, right, what we recommend is a more secure loan, which is this one. That'll take your total repayable only up £20, but it extends it. And it's basically, payment protection was a complete scam, right? It took a 5-6% loan and put it to a 26 to 30% loan, and is now been deemed illegal. I was sat opposite this, and I went off to university, kind of finished up. And then when I graduated, I had an offer letter from MBNA for a decent amount of cash to go come work for us. And I just went, I've seen your practices. The practices of this bank is preying on the financial illiterate. This is not a company that I want to spend my time working for. So instead, and ironically, I went instead on the same business park. There's this little software company that just did address lookups and not much else. And I went and started there. There was 30 people that worked there. It was a company going kind of nowhere. Fast forward a decade, there's 1,000 people. They turn over 100 million, and it was nice just to see that kind of moral decision. I took less money to go work for this little software company, and I did the huge conglomerate. But over the space of that decade, the big MBNA bank had virtually collapsed and barely employed 30 people. And the little software company that I've chosen that had a decent work ethic that seemed to be, now we build products that people want, we don't scam. And they've grown. So that's when you can see what these banks are doing. And I know there's a lot of brainwashing that goes in there, but sometimes I think you should be able to put your work to one point and go, yeah, but I kind of almost know what I'm doing. Banks are largely predatory. That's why they make the bulk of their money on people that can't afford the money they give them. That's literally why they're all giving out credit cards. That's why I get a free credit card in the post every other month with a free limit of 50K on it. And I go, well, what kind of criminals are pre-approving me for 50K that I don't need? And they know I don't need it, but they want me to take it just in case I forget to pay. And then they can put charges on top. And who knows, maybe I'm in a bind right now. That 50K gets me out of the bind. Then all it really does is dig me deeper into a hole. So it still surprises me that he literally won't even talk to you about Bitcoin.
What was said was quite right. It doesn't fit the narrative that within which he works and makes good money. And he's done a very clever zigzag course, leaving a company, going to somewhere else, even rejoining the previous one at a higher level. And within 2 or 3 years, he actually started work as a trainee car auctioneer. And he moved from that into selling cars, became one of the Volkswagen's top salesmen of the year, and then realized that the guys round about him were 50 years old, maybe even more, and were earning what he was now earning. And at the same time, his mates from school now had degrees. So he went back, did a degree in computing and added marketing onto it, and found that he had a customer base computers. He was knowledgeable in computing and marketing, and this appealed to lots of big companies at the time. And within a couple of years, I said to him, "Oh, so and so looks like they're hiring." He says, "No, it's not a top 100 company. I'm only interested in FTSE 100 companies." And he's done well out of that. So I'm not going to criticize him. He's got, given the economic climate for the last 20 years, he's done extremely well. But all I'm saying is, you asked me the question, why can't I orange pill other people in the family? Susie is an absolute grafter. When you're got 2 young kids, she had difficulty getting there, but she got there eventually. She's got 2 fabulous kids, a great husband. If you've ever seen her place, it's a little corner of paradise where they live. And what spare money they put into something quite correctly that will last them, it will last their kids, and it's a good, terrific quality holiday accommodation. And you only need to look on Airbnb, that sort of thing. It's got the ubiquitous hot tub, which is the hot button for everybody wanting a weekend away, and that'll stand them in good stead forevermore. And that really swallowed up all the spare cash. And you do need spare cash if you're going to start investing in Bitcoin. And although I've never thought of it as a gamble, 99% of people do. And who's to say that they're not? They may be more correct than I am.
Immediately when you came on and you talked about your background, however, and the fact that you gravitated towards what your parents were doing, it warmed my heart, genuinely, because I've got 4 kids in the house, and every week with these guys come on here, and I think there's an aversion to even want to even be aligned to Bitcoin. Daddy's on about that crazy thing again, and it's kind of like they are happy to rebel against anything and everything that I do, just because I enjoy it. So I appreciate you don't like football.
They'll rebel against everything you do until they hit a certain age when they kind of go, they're doing it just because they're trying to get their own place in the world, but eventually they come back to it. And I know from personal experience of my kind of like life, but it kind of mixes in, you know, when you're so deeply in the matrix, it's not in your interests, is it? You know, like you're getting paid. It's like if we started trying to orange pill, I don't know, a fund manager that cheers everything, it's everything against their interest, everything against their pay. They're just going to go, I believe the FUD, because it is too painful to unplug those plugs.
That's why, from my point of view, one of the reasons why I find it so important is at least to get off zero, to learn how Bitcoin works, learn how to buy Bitcoin, how to store Bitcoin safely. And the reason why I have such a, you know, I have wallets for just about everyone in my family. Not many people are good enough or knowledgeable enough to be able to store it. But I asked them, can I buy you your birthday or Christmas present and just stack some sats for you? I'll look after them. And the reason I do that is because I'm trying to protect them from the inevitable failure of the finance system, where their pensions do disappear, their investments disappear, the entire economy hits a huge depression. So, you know, potentially, you know, holiday lets, you know, banks, whatever it might be, it could be all over, right? It's you're going to really hit proper hard times, and it's going to be, just as you said before, you're one plane ticket away from Andorra, wherever Bitcoiners end up probably fleeing to if a situation such as that arises, which no doubt Bitcoin will be seen as the enemy. They will make it illegal. They'll ban the on-ramps and off-ramps. So we're going to need to potentially flee. And having as many people of like your friends and close family on board just with that messaging, even a little bit, will be helpful to potentially, that when the time comes, they're willing to leave. Because I've got a feeling that there's quite a few people that will just go, now the TV's telling me everything's fine. It's like, that's what the CEO of every company says the day before the company goes bankrupt. You know, when it's a public listed company, you don't find out the company's bankrupt until 7 o'clock the next morning when the CEO sold all his shares and he's gone. He's off to his private island. And that will be the same thing with the banks. The banks don't let you know they're going to go bust. They go bust when you wake up one day and they go, we've lost your deposit. We've lost your pension. It's all gone. Don't worry. We'll get some of it back, but TBC on the date for that. And so, yes, do you have any of that? Because where it's because obviously you write this book about your children and your grandkids. That's one of the big motivating factors for you buying Bitcoin. And it's if we fast forward and you're gone and it's now your kids and the grandkids growing up through there, you need someone that really understands Bitcoin and understands how to custody it. Because otherwise the worst could happen and it could get lost, right? Or it could just get lost on a ledger, that your 24 words might disappear. Like, who's going to carry that legacy on for you?
Yeah, I must say, the most fearful thing I have is the second generation on, my grandkids. I fear they won't have the standard of living that the boomers had. And although we get unfairly criticized for having a lot of money, the reason we have a lot of money is because we've spent 50 years working for that money. And somebody that hasn't worked 50, 60 years, obviously just doesn't have, they've not a time to save up and create money. Mm-hmm. Having said that, it is getting, the price of property is just it's going up in price, not in value. It's going up in price more than you can save for, and it's been doing that for so long. And when it's mainly a price, a law of supply and demand. We just haven't been building enough houses because people naturally aspire to having a nicer and nicer house. It was difficult. It was completely different in the 50s and 60s. You could build a high-rise tower 16 stories high, and it's more like a giant dovecot with not an awful lot of space for a family to live in. Nobody's going to build that sort of thing nowadays. Everybody wants their own piece of ground with a house on it. But to do that, you've got to build far, far more than we've ever been building. And one of the great disappointments in my life is the lack of available ground that individuals can buy to build their own property on.
And who limits that?
Well, that's governments and NIMBYs.
Ding, ding, ding.
But don't you think
it's a fake scarcity is what I would answer to that. I don't think there's been any real lack of human knowledge that there's a lot of money in housing, right? But the fact is there's a fake scarcity around housing, especially in the UK. There's plenty of land to build houses easily enough, and there's plenty of very good builders here that would fly those very good quality homes up. However, planning permission, that is the biggest hurdle, and who fundamentally rubber stamps approve or disapprove. It's the government, it's the people in the government, and they can only approve so many houses each year. And it's, well, why are they doing that? It's, well, let's just look at where do the politicians and the people above them have the majority of their wealth? It's in property. So of course they're incentivized to create fake scarcity to pump their asset, and they don't care that means that all these first-time buyers and the new generation can't afford to even get on the ladder. They don't care. They just go rent one of my buy-to-lets. You know, that's their solution with no forethought around what that's doing to people.
So you do realise you're not going to get invited to sit on the WEF with views like that?
Oh, I would never. I'm more likely to be picketing the West reset than ever entertaining them to talk at one of their events. Jeez.
But kind of like going into that, a different angle of it is the actual renting. What's the actual stats on the percentage of houses as rentals at the moment? Because I reckon it's got to be sky high. And the reason why it's got to be sky high because there's no value in money, you know. And I think that's part of the problem of available houses. I think there's a lot more available houses, but obviously people want to stick their money somewhere, and it's into houses because they know it's, well, roughly inflation proof.
I don't think you're actually left with an awful lot at the end of the day. By the time you've done up a house and rented it out, and it suffers degradation just naturally, you've got taxation of all sorts. You're a sitting duck for taxation because the government knows exactly where you live and exactly what properties you own and where they are. And I think housing in the long run is not a particularly good store of value. There was a period when people were buying lots of properties off plan and were putting reasonably good families in them. And you know, there was the famous couple of school teachers that built up a huge empire with rented property. But if you're looking at something over a long period, it's a bit about the ship coins that we've been talking about. To me, they were pretty much like what I had seen over the years. And I'll throw some names out, which you have long since forgotten about or never knew. The first televisions were called Ferranti. And then you had things like Ultra and Ferguson and Colster brands. They've all gone. Then the Japanese came in. And Sony, for example, became the biggest, but they've really pulled out of the domestic market. They play around with televisions, but they're mainly they bought half of Hollywood. So as a brand, they've kept going. But other ones, Panasonic and Toshiba and Aiwa, and they've all disappeared. Right now, it looks like Toyota might go out of business. The companies come and go. The markets change all the time, and if you don't keep up with them, I give an example in the book of Ferranti. Ferranti was a huge successful company, made so much profits it just couldn't give a shit. And within 10 years it had gone bust, and you wouldn't have believed that Ferranti could have gone bust. And that's to me what all the coins other than Bitcoin are all about. They're just here today, gone tomorrow. Made worse by venture capitalists who are getting away with murder by not having any sort of regulations controlling what they're doing to the public. I hope you guys haven't lost too much on shitcoins.
Oh no,
No.
I think I've had two kind of like ventures. I bought ETH because it was the second biggest one. I could buy a whole coin when I first went into the market. I think I made quite a lot of money, but then I discovered the massive fees as I was selling it. And then I bought Ripple on some weird exchange, and it took me days to find out where it was. And I sold it. I bought Bitcoin with it on my exchange, and I can't get off that exchange, whatever it is, because I couldn't find the security for it. So, but I managed not to lose money on shitcoins, but I didn't go deep into it.
Right, I'm conscious we haven't really talked about your book yet, and so Never Look especially has a load of great questions on there. So I reckon if we all just pick one, and then I reckon we're going to be out of time, right? So I'll pick one. I added it earlier, right? So on page 85, you alluded to that you learned the hard way about staking your Bitcoin, and you didn't divulge much else. But I gathered from that you must have used one of the BlockFi or Celsius type platforms to stake some Bitcoin. Did you do that? Did you get stung?
No. In fact, I've used blockchain.com a lot over the years. And that was because in the early days, I looked at this company and I thought, oh, well, if they're called blockchain.com, they must know what they're doing. And in fact, they were based in the UK, and they're now in Estonia or Latvia or someplace like that. And I think that was because they were, like everybody else, they were sailing close to the regulator's wind. And
it's easier to get a license, I believe, over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the reason why.
So they had an obfuscated savings interest bearing account that you could put your Bitcoin in. And I thought, oh, well, yes, crikey, it's getting it's like 10%, let's say. So, 10% is better than a poke in the eye. And for 2 or 3 years, it was sitting in that, doing quite nicely. And little by little, I'm starting to think, this is just like an ordinary bank. I put money in the bank thinking it's my money, and it's no longer my money. Everybody's bank account is exactly the same. If your salary goes into a bank, you're funding the bank. You're not funding yourself. And although there might be an insurance scheme, a so-called insurance scheme that will give you £85,000 or something back out of a deposit account, that's only if the government can afford £85,000 for a few people. If it's everybody, you ain't going to get your £85,000. That's for sure.
That's a soundbite right there. Thank you.
My question would be around the ETF. Sorry, I was trying to find the page, but I was failing quite badly.
69, actually, with all of the various different companies all applying for the ETF.
Yeah. So you talked about the future of the ETF. Where do you see that going? And do you see any potential downside?
Yeah. The trouble with a lot of Bitcoin going into the hands of a diminishing number of people, which is right now is what I think is going to happen over the next, let's say, 100 years. The big companies are even just now, if you look back when I bought my first Bitcoin at £2,000 or something like that. And you felt a complete idiot because the year before you could have bought it for probably 200 quid. But that soon moves on, life moves on. But at each stage, it was becoming more and more expensive to buy. And right now, I couldn't enter the market from scratch at whatever it is today, 27,000 or something. I need to look behind. Yeah, 27 and a half. For me to enter the market and buy a handful, that's a hell of a lot of money. And
you could still buy the same amount, you just would get less Bitcoin, right? It's the decision would be the same.
But it's the attraction, isn't it? It's why, I mentioned I went for ETH earlier because I got a whole coin. You want the whole coin.
That's just such weird unit bias that humans have, right? We need to just split it down into sats and go, yeah, fine, the whole coin life is gone, but you can have 100,000 sats, 1 million sats.
And now I've forgotten what the question was.
It was about the ETF and where you see it going.
Yes, okay. The more and more people that own Bitcoin, and especially if they're companies, they will become vulnerable to the American government, for example. Individuals are much, as we've discussed, are much more difficult to control. And if you've got a huge amount of Bitcoin that can be, like gold, confiscated, what CEO is going to go to prison defying a government? Individuals are much more difficult to imprison when there's 10 million behind them. But if they've taken over the majority of Bitcoin, anyway, you get the argument. In the short run, that's a totally different argument. In the short run, I'm licking my lips already. But as my wife would say, that's all very well, but if you're going to sell it, but if you're not going to sell it, it's toy money, it's monopoly money. It's, if you're not going to sell it, when are you going to get the actual benefit from it? You can argue, all right, once it goes to 1 million, I'll sell half a Bitcoin or something like that and play with that. And that's true, you could do. But then you say to yourself, if I spend, it's the same problem at any point in its life cycle, it's going to get more and more valuable. And spending 10 grand just now, you're effectively spending 100 grand in 2 years' time, aren't you?
Yeah.
But with the point, it's inevitable that it's going to reach 500,000.
Yeah.
1 million, because the pound will devalue to that point at some point, and it's not going to be good. So when you come to sell half a Bitcoin, you'd be like, well, do I really want to have that 500,000?
And property is, by then, will be £1 million for a basic house or something, already houses in England are £1 million for something that's, you wouldn't pay £1 million at this end of the country. Anyway, that's my fear, is that Bitcoin could become vulnerable to governments through ETFs.
Yeah, I think that the threat is very real. It's just that, unfortunately, I think it's the threat is only for the people that invest in the ETFs. They're the ones that are either going to get taxed or have those coins confiscated. And if anything, it just makes Bitcoin more scarce because those coins essentially go out of circulation.
But it will never be confiscated, because we discussed this, and one of my fears is it's paper Bitcoin, isn't it? Exactly. This is the IOUs.
No, I got to disagree. I know you're looking at it from the person that buys stocks and shares in the funds. I'm talking about Coinbase, for example, BlackRock, Fidelity, Grayscale. Somebody's got to hold those Bitcoins on their treasury, on their in their safe somewhere, and at that point, it becomes vulnerable. I'm talking about right at the base layer.
Okay.
Yeah, mine is, I suppose, a little bit of a different angle. Mine is more like, you will never own that Bitcoin as an investor. That company will, and they can pretty much just tell you to do one. So that company, if it does go into hyper Bitcoinization, BlackRock will be like, what Bitcoin? Sorry, that fund disintegrated or whatever else. So it's kind of like going back to the US in the 40s, when they just went, give me your gold. Oh yeah, we'll peg that gold, so now we get a massive value. You never having this back.
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of thought that it's manipulated because it's a valuable asset and it'll be taken off you.
Well, something like 7 out of the 9 ETFs that have applied have named Coinbase as their custodian.
And that's interesting. So it should be one for one, you'd hope.
No, it is one for one, but who's holding the actual Bitcoin? It's not.
Yeah,
It's not going to be Grayscale.
No. No, we've covered this on the pod as well, that
They're going to
Coinbase,
subcontract it.
yeah, and Coinbase seemed to be very much under the crosshairs of the US government already.
Yeah.
And we saw at the social media companies, right? There was a lot of people talking very freely. And one thing governments do not like, not only do they not like you inventing your own form of money, they definitely don't like free speech. So the social media companies all got hauled up in front of Congress, and then surprise, surprise, the US government and governments around the world are all plugged in now, censoring and banning people as they see fit. And that none of those founders wanted to do that, but they were put under extreme pressure to either, we can break up your company, we can tax you, we can put you in prison. These are all the options, or comply
and play boy. Yeah, play ball.
Continue running your company, but under this set of rules. And I suspect Coinbase are already essentially a government asset, as much as I see it. The amount of control the US government likely have over Coinbase now, any Bitcoin that Coinbase or any subcontractor of Coinbase is custodying on behalf of any customer, you might as well just go, the US government already have it. It's very unlikely they will give you that back if there's a pinch, if there's a big pinch in the US economy anywhere, they will happily confiscate those funds and use it to underpin the losses they've made elsewhere. Anyway, so never look. Last question.
Yeah, naturally, I've got two questions, but if you can answer them super, super quick. The first was, I was going to get your opinion on, okay, fantastic. I've listened to the whole pod, but I think I'm going to stick with my pension as opposed to invest in Bitcoin. I didn't know your background and what happened previously with your pension, of course. So what would you say to somebody who says that, no, I'm just going to stick with my classic pension?
You know what? We're actually entering a tremendous age for Bitcoin. I'll try and make this quick. If you just think of all the things that we're heading for a halving. We've got the ETFs heading this way. With any luck, there'll be a change at the SEC. We'll get rid of Gary Gensler. FOMO is going to kick in at any point. I've written my book, for example. Now, you can't get a better bullish move than that. ESG, for example. ESG just, 18 months, 2 years ago, when Elon Musk raised it for the first time, I really thought, oh, we're in deep shit here. Because, without a doubt, Bitcoin uses an awful lot of power. And it was long before what was subsequently happened. But ESG, even according to Larry Fink of Grayscale, just doesn't figure into it. He's actually not, he said a few months ago, ESG has become politicized. I'm not going to mention it again. It's just not part of our, it's not a parameter that we'll now look at in our investments. And that was a precursor to him then moving in and saying, we're going to start investing in Bitcoin, because he ditched the ESG. Now, you add all those things together, right now, it's a completely changed scene. We've even got rid of the idiots and the FTXs and the Three Arrows and what have you. And even some of the folk you listen to, Dan, it's Digital Asset News, he lost a fortune on shilling some of the investments that you could make in it. I've forgotten right now the name of the one who was the famous one. But so we've got that's all behind us now, and we've got all this good stuff coming ahead of us. So anybody that's wondering what to do with at least some of their pension money, they've got to put it into Bitcoin. And it's going to become such an attractive thing. Once it passes its all-time high, then that argument goes as well. Oh, look, it was up at 69,000, it fell down. We're now back past that. That argument disappears, just like the ESG argument and everything else. Sam Bankman-Fried will be in prison, and life is going to be really, really much more attractive.
So,
Thank you.
have you got a lot of "I told you so's" coming?
To my wife. Yeah.
You can play this
Fortunately,
back to her, can't you? Each evening.
sorry, say again.
You can play this podcast recording back to her each evening, just in the background.
Yeah. She'll no doubt want to listen to the first 5 minutes, and then her eyes will glaze over. I did ask her to proofread my book, but she'd read the first couple of chapters and changed some I's to we's or we's to I's or something like that. But that was as far as she got. So anyway, your second question, what was that?
My second question is actually leads on very nicely. Is there going to be a part 2 to the book?
Okay, what I'm doing is I've registered Bitcoin, the digital gold, as a URL .com, and I'm going. As you know, the book has a number of appendices at the back, which were subjects that didn't merit a full chapter. So that I'm going to be keeping the book up to date with extra appendices on Bitcoin, the digital gold website, and I might even do the odd podcast or what it's been suggested I should do an audible version of the book, because most people listen to audibles when they're driving in the car or what have you. So these are things in the future. I have an idea for book number 2, but I'll keep that under wraps just now. It'll need an awful lot more hard thinking. Yeah, good. Anyway, I've enjoyed this evening. Sorry if I've rambled too much.
It's
great having you on.
Yeah, really
been great. Ever since like that, I just literally, Susie just left the company I used to work for. I just wished her a while. She saw Bitcoin in my title and went, "Oh, my dad's into Bitcoin. He's written a book." I went, "What? How do I not know this? And what the hell is this book called?" And 2 weeks later, you're on the pod. You've had a long chat about it. So it's great how things work out.
Okay, be pleased to come back on anytime. Thanks very much for the invite.
Thank you.
Thanks
Right, well,
much,
in normal fashion, I'll take us out. And this has been Pod 118, brought to you by Mr. All-In, aka the $1 Trillion Man, Dr. Evil 10%, aka the People's Champ, myself, Sir Neverlook, aka the Excellence of Execution. Surprise, surprise, even with a guest, Mrs. No Show still appears as a no show. And Ralph, aka Digital Dad, thank you very much.
Here's to the moon.